My name is Mike Browne, pronouns he, him, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager for Hilltop Educator Institute, the professional development and community outreach arm of Hilltop Children's Center, a Reggio-inspired preschool on the traditional lands of the Duwamish tribe, the first people of what is now known by colonizers as Seattle, Washington. As a professional development institute focused on anti-racism, equity, and social justice, we have to constantly examine ourselves, our programs, and actively eliminate barriers to learning so we can all benefit from the knowledge and rich experiences of others. Over the course of the years, we've listened, we've reflected, and now we're responding to the calls of our friends in Tennessee, Indiana, DC, New Mexico, Canada, and more to make our offerings more accessible. So, welcome to our newest segment called Community Voices. Now, despite being short in minutes, these segments pack a powerful punch. They're rich in knowledge from leaders within the field, and best of all, they're free. So grab a pen, share with a friend, and as Hilltop Core Values says, let's learn in relationship with each other. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Browne. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager here at Hilltop Children's Center. I'm an Educator Institute, a professional development, equity focused institute working with the amazing and brilliant minds who are educating our children, working in partnership with our families. And we're also a Reggio-inspired preschool and after-school program on the traditional lands of the Duwamish tribe here in Seattle, Washington. And here's another episode of Community Voices. I'm with Nadia Jaboneta, and I can go on and on and on about how amazing she is, but I'm just gonna let her do her thing. So Nadia, welcome.
Thank you, Mike.
And just share with the audience name, pronouns, where you're from, and everything like that. That'd be great.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I haven't met you personally, but I'm so glad to meet you for the first time online here. My name is Nadia Jaboneta, and I live in San Francisco, California, and I work at Pacific Primary School with 4 and 5-year-olds. I'm also the program coordinator there. Worked there for about 12 years. I've lived in San Francisco my whole life, so I'm really proud San Franciscan, really proud to be working in my community, also doing some work with First 5 San Francisco and San Francisco State University. Also have my 3 children and husband that we've all lived here in San Francisco our whole lives. It's hard to come by San Franciscans nowadays. It's getting so expensive here. But anyhow, my pronouns are she, her. I am also a very proud Peruvian American. My parents came here, I have to do the math now, 54 years ago, just to get more opportunities and give us a better life than they had over there. And I'm super proud to be Peruvian, to speak Spanish, and really hold on to that culture and pass it on to my 3 children. So again, very excited to be here.
Perfect. We're going to have to get you on our Napcast, which is a podcast that I host with my colleague, Nick Terrones, who's Mexican Native American. And we actually just dropped one this morning called Nuestros Futuros y Nuestros Niños. So we did it kind of half in Spanish and half in English. But I'm gonna tap you on when we get off of this phone, and we're going to have to talk about getting...
Nice.
Very grateful that you're here. And I know that you wrote a book, so I really want to just dig into that. So I know much of your work has been around schema theory in young children, and is written through a curriculum lens rather than an academic one. So when you and your co-author and a dear friend of ours at Hilltop, Deb Curtis, wrote a book on that through stories and storytellings of your practices and connecting it with other brain development research, I feel like that just blew the industry by storm. So just kind of using that lens brought you some aha moments. So can you document your growth for us? Like, what did you learn, both just about the children you work in partnership with, and then about yourself as an educator?
Sure. No, thank you. It's a great question. In thinking about my work with Deb, who we always say, how long have we known each other? We're such good friends now that I've lost track. It might have been 6, 7, 8 years. Something that brought us together is this passion for storytelling and really using that as a platform to share the children's work, share their voices, share how brilliant they are. So that really brought us together. My journey with storytelling began when I was going to San Francisco State to get my master's degree. I was really looking at that as, okay, how is storytelling so powerful? How can we as teachers use that more? And what I learned about myself is that, oh, I'm a storyteller. I'm telling stories every day. Like, I can't stop telling stories. When I get home, I'm telling my husband stories of what happened at work, what happened with this child, and, telling stories of what we did last weekend. So we're all, I feel, storytellers, even if we don't know it. So using this in this book that Deb and I wrote together was really a powerful way to share the children's stories, share our thinking about the work they're doing, using photos. And lots of aha moments definitely happened as we were writing this together. We had an idea about what stories we wanted to highlight, what schemas. We had specific stories in mind, but as we were working together, something might have happened just that morning. Like, Dad, guess what happened this morning? These kids had these big giant bouncy balls, and they decided they were going to stack them up on the slide. And normally, we don't let the kids do that. And then I let them, and this happened, and that happened. She's like, well, now you have to include that in the book. Like, okay. And there I already had the story put together because I had just told it to Deb. And of course, I had, tons of photos because that's such a huge part of documenting these stories. So it was a great process just working side by side with Deb and putting this book together and learning a lot about ourselves as storytellers, documenters, and seeing the power of young children.
So I assume this didn't just happen overnight. I mean, you've been in the field for what, 20 plus years?
22 years now.
I didn't mean to age you, so for that. Well, I guess this question is about what had changed in you, right, and in your thinking to allow you to become comfortable and allowing children to really explore, to engage, to take risk, in order to kind of develop the brains and the muscles.
Yeah, no, I was thinking back about my beginning of this journey, which was I remember it very clearly, 1998, I began working at the university where I was also studying at the Early Childhood Education Center there. And my thinking, and I think a lot of it might have been also my upbringing and my culture, but my view of myself as a teacher was, okay, I'm going to have all these plans. I'm going to plan out these next few months. Here's what I want the kids to learn. Here's what it's going to look like. Here are the materials I'm using. And it's my way or the highway, kids. Here's what it's going to look like. I even had a book. I forget what it was called, but something like the Preschool Teacher's Survival Guide, and it had all these ideas of what to do Monday through Friday for every week of the month. And it had a whole year planned out. And that was like my guide. So one day, a friend of mine said, you have to read this book. It'll change your life. Sure. So she gives it to me, Learning Together with Young Children by Deb Curtis, Margie Carter. I read the whole thing in one day, and that was beyond an aha moment. It literally changed my life. Like, oh my gosh, I've been doing the complete opposite of all this. I want to be this kind of teacher. These stories, that's who I want to be. So that began, I lost track of what year that was, but it was a while ago. And I began my journey there in how can I become this kind of teacher? Where do I start? What can I do? During that time, the thinking lens wasn't, they were using it clearly in the stories, but it wasn't a thing that was put together yet, the thinking lens, but it was in there very clearly of what the teachers were doing to really think together with the young children, with their colleagues. And that's where I began to really see, I made a change, and I've been learning ever since. I see myself as a learner. I'm learning something new every day, and I continue to learn from the children as well as my colleagues and people I meet new in the field, like you, Mike. I apologize, I didn't turn my ring off. But yeah, that's a little bit of kind of where my huge aha, like turning point was a while ago.
Perfect. So what have you learned, I guess, during COVID? What's been your newest inspiration?
Well, my newest inspiration has been to really embrace the unknown, and I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Things might change. There's going to be new guidelines, but really still continuing to use my heart and my mind to focus on what's important, to hold on to our values, even though there's a lot of uncertainties, a lot of unknown, but continue to keep the children, the families, my colleagues, my family at the very, heart of it. And that really is the most important to me. And it's really helped me get through all of this. We've been open since June. We reopened, and it was a little scary at first, but really, again, holding on to those values and what we were going to do as a community together, it really helped us get through this in a really positive way.
Mm. And when we think of storytelling, right, we usually just think of actual written documentation. Coming from our rich cultures, right? You're Peruvian, I'm Afro Caribbean. What other forms of storytelling are you able to share with your class to bring that piece of your culture with them?
Yeah. It's funny you asked that, because this summer, one of the children fell while playing outside and had a bloody knee, I think.
Mm.
And she was really upset. And my co-teacher used a story about herself falling when she was younger to help her calm down. And that caught all the children's attention. They circled around her. And we went to lunchtime right after that. And the child who had fallen said, "Can you tell me another story about when you were young?" So this had turned into the rest of the summer being lunchtime as telling stories about our childhood, which really connected to our families, to our culture. And the children really connected with, "Well, tell me more. And then what did your mom do? And then what about your big sister? And then what about that story about your cousin and the food?" And so it was just, again, storytelling being used in this powerful way to connect with the children and learn about each other. And we'd ask the kids, "Well, you tell us a story." And they're like, "What? We get to tell stories too?" And so they started to create stories. And it was great to see, because you'd see things about their family in the stories. They would include things that we were learning together in the classroom. And it was just, the first time I read one of the stories that I was dictating, I wanted to cry. I was like, "Oh my gosh, we learned this together this summer. You're including it." It was about a teddy bear who who got a delivery, and the teddy bear opened it, and there was a sign, and the teddy bear says to its mom, "What does this sign say?" "Oh, it says Black Lives Matter." "Oh," then the teddy bear says, "What does that mean?" And the mom explains. And again, this is something we had learned together in the classroom. So seeing this child tell this story as a way to share our culture, our classroom culture together, was great to see.
I love that anecdote. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Um, just schemas is just such a powerful force in child's development. Uh, and just schema exploration drives children's social connections because, they all do it. We all do it. That's all we really innately understand. And I think you can apply schema theory with reflective practice. And I think is one of, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's part of the reason why you've been so successful in your career. When you're watching a child engage in an activity, and let's say the activity is a child dropping a toy off their high chair repeatedly. Using that example, what questions are you asking yourself? What perspective are you trying to take on? How are you collaborating with your colleagues? Really all in an attempt to support children's and getting to a deeper level of play with the materials.
And thinking about the example you gave, I was like, "Is Mike, does he have a little hidden camera in my home? How does he know I have a baby in a high chair throwing things?" So I have a baby, Luna. She's 9 months old. And since last month, that's been her thing. And I'll put a little basket of toys, and one by one, drop, drop, drop. So being knowledgeable about schemas and having learned about that in New Zealand and really being able to study that for a while with my colleagues, I was able to immediately be like, "Oh, she's starting to explore schemas. This is so exciting." So the first thing I do is observe. Okay, let's see what is she doing with these materials. So she's picking one up. She's first studying it. She's, seeing if there's any tags on it. If there's a tag, she's touching the tag and then drop. But she's watching it drop. And I ask myself questions. Is she, listening to the sound it makes? Is she seeing how big it is? How is she deciding which one to drop first? What is she thinking when she's examining these materials? What is my role? What other materials can I offer for her to continue this exploration? And I'm also thinking, how can we go deeper? What should we do tomorrow with this schema? So it's the same thing. She's 9 months old, but we're doing the same things with the older kids, whether they're 2, 3, 4, 5. First step is to observe and see what they're doing. And then what can our role be? How can we go deeper with them? And again, depending on their age, you're going to continue this work in a different way, and depending on also what they're doing with the material. But it's really exciting work. My kids watch me and they're like, "You're such a nerd, Mom. I knew you were going to say that she's doing schemas." I'm like, "Well, she is."
You mentioned for a second about New Zealand. So you went to New Zealand. How has that deepened, I guess, your ability to be a reflective practitioner?
Yes, and I went to New Zealand with my colleague, Brian Silvera, who also works at Pacific Primarily. We were very fortunate to get to go together and the study tour with Margie Carter. And that's where we learned not only about schema theory, but also other things like learning stories and how to use the thinking lens, and also about their form of assessment, which is completely different than what we're doing here in the United States. So really learning about all these different ways that they are reflective practitioners and how to incorporate that in so many levels, not just directly in the classroom with young children, but in all kinds of different levels, really transformed our way of thinking and what we could bring back. And it was this conversation as we would learn something new. Brian and I would say, "Well, how are we going to bring that back? What are we going to do? We could never do that. We have to do the DRDPs and use the checklist. We could never do learning stories." And Margie overheard us one day and she said, "I have a challenge for you. I want you to not think about that. Just live in the moment, be here now, learn about what they're doing here, and worry about that later." And we're like, okay, we could do that. So we took that out of our minds and really just learned together with the group of people that were there, learned from our colleagues there, and we were able to bring back, we could never be New Zealand, but what did we learn there that we can modify and make it our own in our way? And we were really successful in bringing back connecting our values to learning stories, connecting our values to assessment. How can we use our observations of children and then connect it to the DRDPs rather than use our DRDPs as the lens, but incorporate that afterwards so that we're the ones, driving this with the children and the families and our colleagues. So we learned a lot, and we've been so inspired by the work that they've been doing there.
Which I think is probably a good segue to my next question I'm thinking of, because we do live in the age of tests, quizzes, and this prescriptive, predetermined models of education. In New Zealand has a different model, and really storytelling is a complete opposite of what I guess our government is trying to pigeonhole us into doing. And even tying this back to the book you wrote, which is through a storytelling lens, how does stories enhance the quality of schemas children possess? And how does the quality of schemas in turn enhance the level of interpreting, predicting, and understanding stories?
No, that's a good question. I think, again, going back to what we learned at New Zealand, storytelling was so crucial in documenting the children's work and using these stories to not only show their parents or the other teachers, but to even show the children, reading the stories to the children about themselves, about the work they're doing, whether it was individually or as a group, as a team, and even saying to them, "Hey, did you know that what you're doing right now, that's called the schema. It is called transporting, and that's really showing me how your brain's working." So really having almost, I feel like I got permission when I was in New Zealand of like, oh, I could talk to kids about what they're learning. And like, I hadn't thought about talking to the kids about schemas. And I think like often we think we need to have this conversation just with the colleagues or just with the parents at a meeting about what their child's learning. But no, also involving the children in their learning, just it really transformed our connection as a community in our classroom to really trust the kids and treat them with respect about, hey, did you know that you're learning through play? And a lot of kids are like, what? We are? Like, yeah, here's what you're learning right now when you did this and when you did that. And it turned out to become our project for that school year, where we just worked side by side with the children and learning about schemas and what each schema meant and how they showed it naturally through their play. And it was just, again, learning with them because it was also new to us, and storytelling together. So we would write their stories about the work they were doing using dictating. We'd write stories about what we saw and read it back to them. And it was just a very powerful way to learn together.
Now, how do you communicate the power of stories or even the power of play to families, especially families of color?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I feel like, just being fully transparent, I feel like a lot of this work I do, I'm able to do because this is something that existed already at Pacific Primary. Families who are coming in already know. They're going on a tour. They're looking at our website. They're reading about us. This is our main goal. We're really value children's play. Here's how children learn. Here's what you will see here when you come to Pacific Primary. Here's how we are going to display what the children are learning through the play. We're writing this in our weekly journals, in our learning stories, in our newsletters. So I've already come into this way, the structure where the families are learning about it and they know they're going to learn about it. And it's our job as the teachers to show that through the work that we're doing, whether, again, it's documentation, something we have up in the classroom, or now we've been challenged to how do we show that when they can't come in the classroom? How are we going to show the value of play through a newsletter, through just photos, through a Zoom call? So I feel like I'm a little bit spoiled. I've already come into this work with the structure set up, and it's so important at Pacific Primary. They have this commitment to young children and play, and again, I just feel spoiled to work there.
In terms of just writing your stories and your documentation, can you remember how it was, I guess, 22 years ago now?
Mm-hmm.
Now, just the growth in what have you learned? How has your styles potentially changed since that time?
Sure, yeah, no, it's very clear to me, even though it was over 20 years ago. I remember we had a storyteller that would come in every week, and she had these stories that she would tell that were, she would tell the kids, this story, I didn't write this story. Nobody knows who wrote the story. It was, someone told it a long, 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 long time ago. And the children are like, what? Oh my gosh, we don't even know who created the story. So in observing her and learning more about storytelling, I began to learn, oh wait, I tell these stories all the time. Maybe I should document these stories that I'm telling. And even back then, I still remember stories I would tell, and I didn't know there were stories. And then the kids would tell me, "Can you tell that story again?" I was like, "What story? Oh, you mean how I got stung by a bee this weekend while I was at the beach? Yeah, tell it again." So again, from then I learned, storytelling is such a powerful tool. Let me write down these stories that we're telling every day, which is about something that happened to me, something that happened to the children. And I was able to learn little by little how to incorporate that into my documentation, how to incorporate that into what I was showing the families about how we learn. And it became much more natural to me. And you could still show theory and practice, but it's in this much more natural way that us as humans can all relate to, which is storytelling. And I also found that the parents were more likely to give me feedback and write back when I would send these stories rather than a boring newsletter, let's just say. But if it was a story, they're right back, oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing this about the children. I'm seeing this at home too. And now I know, I'm connecting with what they were talking about and why they were asking for more toilet paper tubes. And, I get it now and things like that. So it's been a powerful journey for sure.
Is there a way that, so just thinking about, because I know social justice is very much on the forefront of all of our minds and it's really been incorporated into your work since day one. Is there a way that you communicate, I guess, differently or meet the needs of different communities who might not have access to technology?
Yes. Well, we're also, it's a great question. I'm trying to think of all these things in my mind. I'm like, where do I start? So I think in terms of technology, we're communicating closely with families in our school about what's their best way of communicating to you, or do you have access to a computer or phone to go to this website that we use for communication? Would you like a paper copy? Should we do a phone call every week so we can connect about how your child's doing and the curriculum we're working on? But looking at it in a bigger scope, like our community, I feel like part of my role that I'm really excited about doing, and it's important to me, is facilitating workshops or webinars so that it's not just Pacific Primary in San Francisco doing this work, but I could support other teachers in our community who are expected to do all these things that are mandated by the government. So I know Margie and Deb often call it alphabet soup, and I often lose track of them. The TRDPs or the ECHRs, or there's so many out there now. So I like to share the work that I'm doing with young children to say, you can do it too. It's not just us here, but let's think together about the importance of storytelling, the importance of really observing children, how to put that first, and then be able to connect it with all these mandated assessments that we need to do. So I feel like that's really important to me to share. The children in my classroom are often saying, we want to spread the word. So I'm going to use their language, how to spread the word of the importance of storytelling and schemas, and really seeing young children first before all the mandated paperwork. And it's hard because a lot of these schools, they have a lot of paperwork to do, and it can become overwhelming, and that's the first thing you're thinking about when you're in the classroom. So it's been a lot of, I think, hard work for people to be able to meet with their colleagues and the directors of how to make changes. How can we incorporate more of this work? How can we become reflective practitioners? So it's happening a lot in San Francisco. With First Five has been really supportive with working with teachers all over the city.
That's amazing. And I like how you even said, I think through learning stories, you're able to be authentic, to write a story, to give it your all, and then you're able to pull out certain things that you need for different ECHRs, for class, for all these different things,
Exactly.
rather than I'm going to write for class, right? Or for these assessment tools. So I really do appreciate that.
Thank you. No, it's a lot of work. It's hard work for sure.
And I guess two more questions I kind of have off the top of my head. Do you have a story that was passed down from in your family that you would, like with Luna, you just can't wait to tell it? Or maybe do you have an example from your class? I know you're doing a lot of work around Black Lives Matter and George Floyd. So any anecdotes you'd like to share us real quick?
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, storytelling definitely is something important in my family too. And my children too asked me, Mom, can you tell us that story of when they call my dad Coco? I don't know where that came from. My oldest invented it when she was like 2. Can you tell us when Coco, first came, and, where he was living and all those funny things he would do? And so there's definitely like all these family stories about, my grandma and my dad and, my uncle. And in fact, just yesterday we watched a movie, I think it was called my a Greek wedding or something like that. And my kids are like, oh, that's just like our family. Look, that's like Uncle so-and-so, and that's Grandpa. So again, just storytelling is just so valuable, in not just in my work setting, but at home as well. And in connecting your question to my work setting, I think something I would love to share just a little bit with all of you about is the importance of listening to young children, even when they have really hard questions or they bring up topics that you're not ready to discuss. And the importance of just, again, really listening to them. And you might not have the right answer. I know I always worry about that. I'm like, oh no, am I responding correctly? Was this the right answer? I don't know what to do. but I'm going to go for it. I'm going to listen to this child. I'm going to listen to the other children. I'm going to invite my colleagues and their families to listen to the children. And let's ask them, how can we move forward? Here's what I think. What do you think? What happened this summer was very powerful, where one child came in and told the whole class. At that moment, we had 12 of them, so we have a smaller class because of COVID. Just announced at snack time his knowledge of what had happened in Minnesota and George Floyd, and he had all the details. And I had just been talking, this is the first day of school coming back from shelter in place, and I had just been talking to my colleague Brian that weekend and asking him, what if one of the children brings it up? Should we be proactive and bring it up first? And how can we do this in a way that's developmentally appropriate? So we were in the process of thinking about that together and making plans with the staff to think about it together. But the child beat us to it. And that Monday was like, let's just talk about it. And my first response was, yes, this did happen. People are angry. People are protesting. I'm angry. And what can we do about it together as a class? Here we are, the 12 of us. What can we do about it? I know when I'm angry, I like to make a plan on what I can do to help. What do you all think? So they all paused, like, okay. So I told them, let's make it your homework. Think about it at home with your grown-ups, with your families. Let's think about it together this week and let's make a plan. And they liked that idea, that what could they do to help? And that became our whole summer curriculum. What can we do to help? There's a song that we sing, what can one little person do? And that just, again, became our anthem for the summer. What can we do? And pretty much just me posing that question. The rest was all their idea. They came back the next day with, one child said, well, have you heard of Black Lives Matter? And none of the other kids had heard of it. It's like, well, let me tell you what it is. And here's what we can do. Let's make signs. And I said, great. Well, tomorrow, absolutely, we can make signs. I'll get some nice paper. We'll get some wood that we can tape onto the back. He said, Nadia, this is too important. We can't do it tomorrow. We have to do it now. Oh my gosh. I was like, yes, you're right. This is too important. Can't wait till tomorrow. Let's do it now. We'll just use what we have. So we made the signs. Then they blew me away again. Okay, when's our march? Like, what march? Well, we can't make signs and not have a march. Like, okay, let me talk to our director. We'll make plans for a march. Well, no, you need to talk to her now. Make a plan now. I'm like, okay, I'll go get her. So again, just listening to the children and really working together with them and seeing how their young minds work. And they want to make a change. They want to understand what's happening in the world. And again, it's tricky making it developmentally appropriate and not, it's just being open to it and not being afraid to talk to young children has been the key with my work with them this summer.
I mean, children have such lively minds, and which is ironic because it's also the name of a book that you
I've heard that before.
I think that was back in 2019?
Yeah.
Right. And then what's amazing about that, it was like a couple months later, you dropped another book. Can't celebrate that, Navigating the Deep Waters of Social Justice Teaching. And that's part of our Reimagining Our Work series. And you mentioned that with Margie and Deb. So, we're in love with them and the work that they do. So I guess my final question, because I did say two, is kind of looking and tying together schemas and issues of equity. So we know our people, Black and brown children, are much more likely to be subjugated to expulsion, to disciplinary actions, to being suspended disproportionately. So what about schemas in social justice teaching is important to know? And what must we constantly remind ourselves so we can disrupt these trends?
I think an important reminder is that, and you mentioned this earlier in our conversation, is that all children explore schemas, whether they know it or not, whether the grown-ups working with them or not. All children are exploring schemas in one way or another. And what I found the differences in working in lots of different preschools in San Francisco is the way that the grown-ups respond to it. And the difference in the response depends on the school, it depends on the leadership they have, it depends on the funding they have, it depends what part of the city they're in, which is, really not fair, right? So again, part of my job, and I feel like the song that I sing with the children, what can one little person do? I'm that little person, is, working together with First Five, working together with my colleague Browne, and doing our best to spread the word that all children learn through schemas. All children deserve to be seen and to provided with the materials for this work to go further. But how can we also connect this with, we understand the importance that you also need to do these lists and assessments, but let's put this first, and how can we support each other so that all children are able to explore schemas, all children are being seen, all children deserve to have a reflective teacher in their setting that really supports their work. And it's little by little, and I see a lot of this is not happening, and it's not fair, and it makes me really sad. So again, I'm continuing my work. There's lots of teachers who are committed to making change in our preschools and also with infants and toddlers, and it's happening little by little for sure, and I'm committed to continuing this work.
Absolutely. I'm encouraged.
Thanks, Mike.
Is there any last kind of thoughts? Anything you'd like to share with the community? Anything you're working on? Maybe another book? Anything Pacific Primary is doing?
That's a good question. I think something that's just on my mind right now is, even though a lot of schools haven't reopened yet, some schools are in the process of planning reopening, some schools have been reopened, I feel like something that hasn't been lost is that teachers are still wanting to learn throughout this process. And I'm seeing lots of teachers connecting, whether it's through Facebook, whether it's through Instagram, it's hosting these webinars. So I think let's all continue to think together and work together and meet on these online platforms to continue to support our professional growth, to support young children and families. And we can all get through this together and still use our hearts and our minds together in this world of COVID and early childhood.
Well said. And I guess a shameless plug for me is we do an educator discussion series, and it's all virtual. In our 2020 to 2021 series, we're doing the Learning Story Conference, and we also have, like I mentioned at the beginning, Napcast, which is a podcast featuring female educators of color and really just our lived experience. So if you're listening out there right now and you want ways to connect and be involved and really be challenged in the way that you're thinking, in the way that we're living out our values, definitely come check it out. And you can always email Nadia or me. So
absolutely. Please reach out if you have any questions.
Yeah. Do you want to share your contact information?
Sure, yes. My contact information is Nadia, Nadia, at pacificprimary.org. If you're interested in learning more about Deb Curtis and myself and the work we've been doing, our books are available through many websites. Red Leaf Press is one of them. So one of our books is Not Learning Together with Young Children. That's Margie's and Deb's book, Children's Lively Minds. And you can also find You Can't Celebrate That through if you just Google it, through many ways to purchase it. So thank you, Mike, for inviting me. Thank you all for listening.
Perfect.